Lila, what on earth are you doing out here? Julian Hart, 38, slammed his SUV door and strode into the downpour. Under the oak, Lila Brooks, his maid, shivered, soaked through. Her navy uniform clung to her body, curls plastered to her cheeks. A dented lunchbox rested on her lap, spoon hovering mid-air. She looked half-frozen, lips trembling from cold and nerves. "Lila," he barked again, disbelief sharpening his tone. "Why are you eating out here? Get inside!" She flinched like a startled animal, snapping the plastic lid shut, eyes glued to muddy stones. I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, voice nearly swallowed by rain. "I didn't mean—" Before Julian could push further, another voice drifted from behind him. Cool, steady, perfectly controlled. "She shouldn't even be here, Mr. Hart." Mrs. Agnes Whitfield, the housekeeper, stepped beneath her umbrella with practiced composure. "I was on my way to inform you," she said. "She broke the Hart family crystal vase this afternoon, the heirloom from your grandmother's collection." Julian's head snapped toward her. "What?" Agnes lowered her gaze, wearing an expression of regret that felt rehearsed. "I found it shattered by the dining corridor," she said smoothly. "She was alone there. She wouldn't admit anything, no matter how I asked." Lila's head jerked up, panic flashing in her dark eyes. "No, sir, please, that's not what happened." Julian's jaw tightened. That vase had been in his family nearly 70 years. His late mother's memory clung to every cut glass edge. "You broke it?" he demanded. "After I made it clear that Wing was off limits for unnecessary cleaning." Lila's voice cracked. "I didn't, sir. I was dusting the hallway when Mrs. Whitfield—" "Enough," he thundered, rage eclipsing. "Reason!" His shout jolted her backward. Her shoe slipped on the slick stone. She fell hard, palm scraping against rough gravel. The lunchbox flew from her grip, spilling rice and beans into the rain-darkened muddy beside her knees. Blood mixed with dirty water around her hand. But she didn't cry. She just stared up at him, eyes wide, shining with shame and something like heartbreak. "I didn't do it," she whispered hoarsely. "Please believe me, Mr. Hart." Julian loomed above her, chest heaving, anger tangled with confusion. Behind him, Agnes's face stayed composed, voice soft as silk. "She's been careless for weeks, sir. I warned her she wasn't suited for fragile tasks." Lila turned toward the housekeeper, desperate. "That's not true. You told me to polish the display case, and then you—" She faltered as Agnes's cold eyes cut to hers, lips twitching into the faintest warning smile, invisible to Julian. Lila swallowed the rest of her sentence, shoulders shaking. Julian raked a hand through his drenched hair and exhaled sharply. "I don't want another word tonight. Clean this up. We'll deal with the rest tomorrow." He turned away, storm raging inside him as violently as the one overhead. "Of course, sir," Agnes said smoothly. "I'll see that she handles the mess." Lila pressed her bleeding palm against her apron. "Yes, sir," she murmured, barely audible. An hour earlier, before the sky split open, the mansion had been quiet. In the main hallway, the crystal vase gleamed atop its pedestal like trapped starlight. Lila, 32, had been dusting the nearby cabinet, careful, practiced. Agnes appeared with arms folded, mouth tight. "You missed a spot," she remarked coolly, tapping the wood. Lila turned to respond. Agnes's elbow brushed the pedestal. The vase wobbled, then tipped, plummeting toward marble with deadly grace. It shattered like a gunshot, shards scattering everywhere. Agnes froze, eyes wide for a single heartbeat, then narrowed with calculation. "Oh my," she murmured, Look what you've done." "It wasn't me," Lila choked. "You knocked—" "Quiet," Agnes hissed. Agnes hissed, stepping closer, voice dropping to venom. "No one saw. If you want to keep this job, you'll carry the blame. Otherwise, I'll tell Mr. Hart you've been taking food again." The threat hung heavier than the broken glass. Tears gathered in Lila's eyes. "Please, I wasn't." "Then leave," Agnes whispered. "Pack, go before he gets home. Sit outside until I decide what to say. Remember, dear, silence is safer than unemployment, especially for someone like you." That was how Lila ended up beneath the oak tree, clutching her small meal as if it were the last thing that truly belonged to her. Inside, Julian stood by his study fireplace, watching flames devour dried logs, bourbon burning down his throat. He'd changed into dry clothes, but a damp sense of unease clung to him. He struggled to drown out her trembling voice replaying in his mind. Agnes's account had been detailed, reasonable, but something refused to settle in his chest. Lila's eyes had held something he recognized too well. Fear, yes, but not the jittery guilt of a liar. The kind of fear he remembered from boardrooms where people's futures were decided over coffee and spreadsheets. He stared out the rain-streaked window. Her silhouette was still faintly visible beneath the oak, hunched and small. "Why doesn't she just come inside?" he muttered. A soft knock at the door pulled him from the thought. "Come in." Samuel Doyle, the gardener, stepped in, jacket dripping, thinning gray hair plastered beneath his cap. At 65, he moved slower, but his eyes were sharp. In his calloused hand, he held a USB drive wrapped in a sandwich bag. "Sir," Samuel said quietly, glancing toward the window, "before you decide anything about Miss Brooks, I think you ought to see this." Julian frowned. "What is it?" Samuel hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering his voice as if walls might overhear. "Security footage," he said. "I put a backup camera near the east corridor by the dining room. Mrs. Whitfield didn't know about it. I saw what actually happened with that vase, sir." Julian stared. "What are you saying, Samuel?" The gardener extended the USB. "She's been riding that girl for months, overworking her, yelling whenever you're away. Today, she knocked that vase over herself, then pinned it on Lila." The study went still. Julian slowly took the drive, metal oddly heavy against his palm. The fire crackled loudly in the quiet. "You're certain?" Samuel nodded grimly. "Watched it before the storm knocked the power. She threatened my job if I spoke." His voice tightened. "But I can't stand by and let her ruin that woman, not after what I saw tonight." Julian's throat dried. He turned to his desk, staring at the silver drive. "Thank you, Samuel. That'll be all." The gardener nodded and slipped out. When the door closed, Julian sank into his leather chair, staring at the rain trickling down the glass. Guilt seeped in, cold and relentless. He couldn't shake the image of Lila's bleeding hand, her spilled food dissolving in the mud. He'd yelled at her, chosen the convenient story, trusted the voice that made his life easier. "What have I done?" he whispered. Outside, the downpour softened to drizzle. Under the oak, Lila still sat, unaware that the truth now lived on his desk. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt something unfamiliar claw at his chest. Real remorse, not the tidy regret of a bad investment, but the messy kind that came with hurting someone fragile. The storm had eased into a steady, gentle fall by the time Julian leaned back, the USB untouched beside his laptop. The fire cast restless shadows along his bookshelves, but his mind paced faster than the flickering light. He should have plugged it in immediately, verified Samuel's claims, but deep down, He already knew. The picture of Lila shaking in the rain wouldn't leave him. She'd sat there, taking his anger like something she expected. His mother's voice echoed from decades ago. "Don't judge people solely by what others say, Jules. Ask who's standing in the mud, not who's holding the umbrella." Tonight, he'd done the opposite. Cold, clinical, like during hostile takeovers. Finally, he snatched the USB, slid it into the port, and opened the single video file. The footage was grainy but clear. The east corridor appeared on screen. Agnes walked briskly past the pedestal, then pivoted sharply. Her elbow clipped the edge. The vase teetered, then crashed, exploding across marble. Julian leaned closer. Seconds later, Lila appeared, entering from the hall, confusion clear in the looseness of her posture. Agnes's expression transformed, chillingly fast. She stepped into Lila's space, gesturing angrily, accusations practically visible in her stiff hands. There was no audio, but the blame was obvious. Then Agnes grabbed Lila's arm and marched her toward the rear entrance, toward the gardens, toward Exio. The timestamp read 5:47 p.m. Julian glanced at the mantel clock. Just after 7. Lila had been outside nearly 90 minutes. He paused the video. On screen, a white woman in a crisp uniform pointed down at a young black maid, cornering her. Something twisted inside him, rage and disgust, mostly at himself. How long had this rotted beneath his roof? How many times had Agnes's polished efficiency been nothing more than cruelty dressed in starch? He stood abruptly, chair scraping the hardwood. Grabbing an umbrella, he strode out of the study. The drizzle chilled his cheeks as he stepped into the courtyard. Security lights hummed on, bathing the path in pale gold. Lila hadn't moved much. She sat with legs tucked to the side, uniform soaked, dried blood dark on her palm. The closed lunchbox rested beside her like a small ruined secret. She only looked up when his shadow fell across her. "Miss Brooks," he said, softer now. She blinked, voice barely there. "Yes, sir?" "You're hurt." She glanced at her hand. "It's fine." "I was wrong," he said. Her gaze lifted, wary. "Sir?" "I watched the footage. The camera outside the dining corridor." He swallowed. "I saw it all." Her breath caught. "Then you know." "Agnes broke it," he said quietly. "She blamed you. She forced you out here." Lila's eyes dropped to her lap. "I tried to explain." "I know," he said. "I didn't listen." Silence stretched between them, broken only by raindrops hitting leaves. Water soaked his shoulders too now, but he didn't care. "I'm not going to ask why you didn't fight harder," he continued. "I think I already understand." "You were scared," he said gently. "Have been for a long time, I'd wager. Scared of losing your job. Scared no one would believe you. Especially someone like me." Her eyes shimmered, stubbornly refusing to spill tears. "I won't make that mistake again," Julian murmured. He shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. She hesitated, then clutched it close. It looked absurdly large, but blessedly warm. "Come inside. Let me look at your hand." "I don't want to cause more trouble," she whispered. "There's no more trouble you can cause," he replied. "Mrs. Whitfield is finished here, effective immediately." That stunned her. "You're firing her?" "I'll make sure she doesn't torment another household again." He extended his hand. Lila stared at it like it might vanish. Then, slowly, she placed her injured palm in his, wincing. He helped her stand. As they walked back toward the mansion, the rain eased, as though the storm had finally spent itself. In the kitchen, under warm pendant lights, Julian gently cleaned her scrape, wrapping it in fresh gauze. She sat on a stool, watching his movements, his coat still around her shoulders. "You have a son, right, Micah?" he asked suddenly. Her eyes widened. "How do you—" "Samuel mentioned him," Julian said. "Said he saw drawings in your place." She relaxed slightly. "Micah wants to be a doctor." Julian tied off the bandage and met her gaze. "Then we'll make sure he gets that chance." Lila opened her mouth, but no sound came. Gratitude swelled too large to fit into words. Julian smiled faintly. "You don't owe me thanks. Just promise you'll never accept less than the truth again, even from people in expensive suits." Her shoulders shook, finally, not from cold, but from release. Julian didn't touch her, just stayed present. Outside, the last raindrops tapped against the windows, gentle as fingertips. Tomorrow would not erase tonight, but it could start mending it. Hours later, the mansion settled into its usual late-night hush, distant hum of heating, the steady tick of the grandfather clock. Julian hadn't slept. He'd watched Lila leave 2 hours before, keeping his distance as she declined a ride. "Walking helps me clear my head," she'd said, still enveloped in his coat, back straight despite the day. Now, Julian stood alone in his study, the USB still in his laptop. He'd replayed the video several times, each viewing cutting deeper. How many mornings had she arrived early, hoping for simple kindness? How many nights had she skipped meals to cover Micah's asthma medication? How many red flags had he ignored because the system worked for him? He poured himself black coffee and stepped into the hallway. It was time. Pressing the intercom, he said, "Mrs. Whitfield, please come to the main office." 5 minutes later, she entered, posture rigid, dark dress immaculate, expression unruffled. "You called, Mr. Hart?" she asked, folding her hands like she was at confession. Julian motioned toward the chair opposite his desk. "Sit," she obeyed. "I've seen the footage," he said. Her head tilted slightly. "Footage, sir?" Julian tapped the spacebar. The monitor lit up, replaying her elbow striking the pedestal, the vase crashing, her accusatory gestures, her shoving Lila toward the back door. He froze the frame with her finger inches from Lila's face. Agnes's mask cracked for a heartbeat. "Ah," she said coolly, "that camera. I wasn't aware Samuel had installed another one." "No," Julian replied, voice cold. "You weren't." She didn't flinch. "What would you like me to say?" "I'd like to know why," he replied, leaning forward. Agnes sat straighter, dropping the dutiful employee act. "She doesn't belong in a place like this," she said evenly. "She walks like a victim. It unsettles the rest of the staff." "Because she's quiet?" Julian asked. "Because she knows how quiet women weaponize sympathy," Agnes countered. "Tears, obedience, submission, it's all strategy. Girls like her work their way into the good graces of men like you." His fingers dug into the armrests. "She has a child, Agnes. She's juggling 2 jobs to survive. You bullied her, threatened her, framed her. When she didn't fight back, you called it weakness." Agnes's eyes stayed cold. "I kept this estate running for 16 years, she said. "No missing inventory, no chaos. You enjoyed that order because I enforced it. Now you'll let it fall apart to play savior for the help." Julian stood. "Get out." She blinked slowly. "Excuse me?" "You're finished here," he said. "Gather your things. The driver will take you wherever you like, but your time at Hart Estate is over." Her composure finally faltered. "You're discarding me. For her?" "No," he replied. "I'm dismissing you because I let your poison seep into my home for far too long." Agnes rose, smoothing her jacket like armor. "You'll regret this," she said. "I regret not seeing you sooner," he answered. She left without another word. The next day, the house felt different. Not quieter, exactly, but cleaner in a way no polish could produce. In the hallway outside the breakfast room, Nina, the younger maid, approached Julian, cheeks flushed. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "For what?" he asked. "For her," Nina answered simply. Julian nodded. He didn't need elaboration. That afternoon, he gathered the household staff beneath the crystal chandelier. Faces he'd barely truly seen before now watched him carefully. "Effective immediately," he said. "Lila Brooks is no longer a housemaid. She'll assist me directly with internal management and staff oversight. Her son's medical expenses will be covered by the Hart Family Trust. If anyone has concerns, my door is open." No one moved. Then slowly, Nina began clapping. Others joined, hesitantly at first, then with real warmth. Julian turned away, unsure whether the ache in his chest was guilt, pride, or both. Across town, in a small two-bedroom apartment squeezed between a corner store and a laundromat, Lila sat on the floor with Micah. He lay cross-legged, pencil in hand, frowning over spelling homework. "How do you spell honor again, Mom?" She smiled. "Honor, remember?" "Oh, yeah," he grinned. "One day I'll be Dr. Micah Brooks. Then I'll buy you a big, fancy lunchbox." She laughed softly. "Deal, Doctor." Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. From Julian Hart. "We should discuss your schedule tomorrow. Some changes are coming, starting with no more lunches in the rain." Lila stared at the screen, throat tight. One small tear escaped. Not from fear, but from finally feeling seen. Lila returned to Hart Estate the next morning under a sky painted soft gold. The storm had passed, leaving everything slick with dew. The property shimmered with the quiet cleanliness that followed chaos. As she stepped through the staff entrance, she sensed something missing. The constant coil of tension. No one avoided her eyes. No one whispered when she passed. Nina smiled. "Morning, Miss Lila." Lila blinked at the new formality. "Miss Lila?" she repeated. Nina nodded shyly. Lila gave a small nod back, adjusting the blazer Julian had provided. Her uniform lay folded in her bag. Today, she wasn't here as the help. Today, she was something else. Julian waited in the East Wing office, a room formerly used for storage, now cleared and rearranged. A sturdy desk faced a window overlooking the garden. A laptop sat ready, beside a neat stack of notepads and pens. "Morning," he said, eyes on his phone. "Good morning, Mr. Hart," she replied. "Here, just Julian," he corrected lightly. "If you're comfortable with that." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, Julian." He looked up, more relaxed than she'd seen. "There's fresh coffee in the side room," he added. "And I had them bring in tea. Figured that's more your thing." "It is," she said, surprised he'd noticed. They stood in a brief, awkward pause before he gestured toward the desk. "This is yours," he said. "You'll help me with schedules, staff needs, rotations, everything that slipped through the cracks." Lila ran her fingers along the desk's worn edge. Real oak, repurposed, like the tree outside, like her own life. "I also spoke with the foundation this morning," Julian added. "We're establishing a medical trust for Micah. Appointments, medication, whatever he needs now and later." Her head snapped up. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. "I want to. He seems like a good kid, and you're clearly a good mother." Emotion burned behind her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled. "You've thanked me enough. Let's get to work." Mid-morning, Lila walked the estate with a clipboard, seeing everything anew. It wasn't just polished surfaces and silent hallways anymore. It was people, patterns, weak points hidden under routine. In the laundry corridor, 2 maids folded towels. "Miss Lila," said Rosa, the older one, "we're glad you stayed." Lila paused. "Thank you, Rosa." "Agnes used to say you wouldn't last," the younger added. "Said you'd break." Lila's smile was small, but real. "I'm not going anywhere." That afternoon, Julian called her to the main office. He sat behind a monitor displaying staff turnover figures. "Do you know we've lost 6 housekeepers in 2 years?" he asked. Lila raised an eyebrow. "I didn't, but I'm not shocked." "You think that was Agnes?" he asked. "I think she built a place people survived, not lived in," Lila replied. "Fear doesn't keep good workers, it just makes tired ones." Julian leaned back, fingers steepled. "Then why did you stay?" She considered. "Because I didn't have the luxury of leaving," she said plainly. He nodded slowly. "Fair." A knock interrupted them. Samuel stepped in, hat in hand. "Sorry to bother you, sir, Miss Lila." Julian motioned him inside. "You don't have to knock anymore, Samuel," Julian said. Samuel smiled faintly. "Old habits." He turned to Lila. "Just wanted to thank you for standing your ground, and for making this place feel less cold." Lila's eyes softened. "You're the one who spoke up," she replied. "I was hiding under a tree. You walked into the storm." Samuel shook his head. "Took me too long. I was scared, too." Julian glanced between them. "I think a lot of us were, not anymore." That evening, after most staff had gone, Lila wandered back to the garden. She followed the stone path to the oak, the very spot she'd sat crying silently 2 nights before. Now the air was still, soil dark but undisturbed. She tilted her head back, exhaling slowly. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about finally breathing without asking permission. Footsteps crunched behind her. "Thought I might find you here," Julian said, joining her at the trunk. "Just needed a minute," she replied. He nodded, looking up through the branches. "I used to think this place ran like a machine," he admitted. "Efficient, predictable. I never noticed what was grinding underneath." She glanced at him, unsure. He continued. "Turns out, the strongest person here was sitting under this tree while I yelled at her." Lila smiled faintly. "I wasn't trying to be strong," she said. "I just didn't have another option." Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He carefully unwrapped a ceramic figurine, old, chipped at the base. "My mom gave me this when I was 11, he said. "I broke a corner once. I hid it for weeks, terrified she'd be furious. When she found it, she said, 'Things break, Julian. That's how we know we use them.'" He met Lila's eyes. "I think people work that way, too." Her breath hitched. He held the figurine out. "Keep it," he said. "A reminder, not everything shattered stays that way." She took it carefully, fingers brushing his. "Thank you," she said softly. They stood in companionable silence as the sun slipped behind the estate. For the first time, Lila didn't feel like a shadow haunting someone else's house. She felt like someone whose presence mattered, whose absence would leave more than an empty chair. The kitchen had always been a space of echoes, pans clanging, gossip murmur, running water. For most of her time here, Lila had moved through it like background noise, efficient and invisible. Today, as she entered, conversation paused briefly. Nina and Rosa, prepping fruit for breakfast trays, looked up, but this time they didn't avert their gaze. "Miss Lila," Nina said, nodding toward a fresh pot. "Coffee's on if you want some." "Thank you," Lila said, setting her tablet down. Don't mind me. Just checking supplies. She scanned pantry shelves, noting missing labels and outdated items. Agnes had always handled inventory alone, wielding it like a weapon. Lila intended something different. Accountability without humiliation. Any issues with deliveries? Lila asked casually. Egg counts short again. Nina shrugged. Happens once or twice a month. Agnes always blames somebody sneaking food home. Rosa snorted. You can't feed a family of 5 with 2 extra eggs. They laughed, tension easing. Lila jotted a note. I'll talk to the supplier, she said, and no one gets accused of anything without proof again. Rosa tilted her head. Strange hearing that from someone who used to get blamed first. Lila's smile didn't fade. Feels strange saying it, she replied, but we're doing things differently now. From the hallway window, Julian watched her through the glass. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the sight rooted him. Lila didn't bark orders or flaunt her new authority. She simply listened, adjusting the system that had once nearly crushed her. She hadn't become someone else. She'd finally been allowed to be herself. He kept walking, mind already on next changes. Later, Lila brought 2 reports to the study, food inventory and maintenance delays. Julian scrolled through estate finances on a second monitor. How's the kitchen? He asked. Lighter, she answered. Less fear, more fruit, he chuckled. Progress. She pointed to a line on the report. We also need to talk about laundry. Rosa's working double shifts. She's limping, but she won't complain. Julian skimmed the notes. Cut her hours by 20%. Raise her pay. I'll cover the difference. Lila blinked. That's generous. It's not generosity, Julian said. It's responsibility. If I can afford marble floors, I can afford not to grind people into them. She tucked that phrase away, something to remember on hard nights. He studied her. You're good at this, he said. I'm just doing what should have happened a long time ago, she replied. That's the hard part, he said quietly, fixing what everyone got used to ignoring. Late afternoon, Lila slipped into the formal sitting room, a place she'd once avoided when guests visited. She'd eaten many rushed lunches in corners, pretending not to hear sneers about bleach smells. Now she sat briefly on the velvet settee. From here, she could see the oak tree's branches reaching toward the sky. Her phone buzzed, a text from Nina. Thank you. Feels like we can finally breathe in this house. Lila typed back, we all deserve AIR. No one should have to beg for it. That evening, Julian surprised everyone by sitting at the staff dinner table. The meal was simple. Roast chicken, vegetables, cornbread, but conversation flowed. Nina cracked jokes. Samuel laughed so hard he nearly spilled his water. Julian, still in his dress shirt but sleeves rolled up, listened more than he spoke. Lila watched him from across the table, noticing the small furrow between his brows, the one that appeared when he was trying to understand instead of control. After dinner, as staff cleared plates, Julian walked Lila to the side door. The night air was crisp, sky finally clear, stars peeked through. Thank you, Lila, he said softly. For what? She asked. For not walking away when I gave you plenty of reasons. She met his eyes. I didn't stay for you, Julian. He nodded. I know. I stayed because people like Agnes don't get to decide where I belong. He swallowed. I'm glad you did. See you tomorrow, she said, stepping into the night, head high. The next morning arrived with a sharper chill, hinting winter wasn't far. Julian stood at his bedroom window, coffee in hand, watching the garden. The oak's leaves were turning burnt orange, some edges already brown. Even the tree was changing. He thought inevitably of Lila. For a week now, she'd arrived at 7 on the dot. Never rushed, always prepared, small notebook at the ready. The staff had adjusted to her leadership faster than he'd expected. Respect had clearly been earned long ago. Today, he had something different in mind. He walked down a quieter east hallway, past old portraits, to a door he hadn't opened in years. He turned the brass knob with a key he hadn't used since his late 30s. Dust motes spun in the light slicing through tall windows. Shelves full of medical journals and charity notes lined the walls. A leather armchair sat beneath his grandmother's faded portrait. On a side table rested a framed photo, his mother, younger, holding him. This had been her sanctuary before illness stole her energy. He'd kept it sealed, afraid to disturb anything. Now, for reasons he couldn't fully name, he knew it needed to live again. Not as a shrine, but as something useful. He texted Lila. "Meet me at the East Hall. Bring your planner. Got an idea." Moments later, she walked down the corridor, steps careful on the creaking floorboards. She paused at the doorway. "I've never been down here," she murmured. "Almost no one has," he replied, brushing dust off a shelf. "This was my mother's room. She was a nurse. Planned fundraisers here, wrote letters, organized clinics." Lila stepped inside, breathing in the lingering scent of old pages and lavender. "It still feels like her," she said. Julian nodded. "I want it to matter again, not just as a memory." She looked around. "What do you want it to become?" He hesitated. "A staff wellness room, quiet space, books, resources, a place to exhale." Lila blinked. "That's incredible." He smiled awkwardly. "I was hoping you'd help design it. You know better than I do what people here actually need." Her throat tightened. "I'd be honored," she said. A new kind of legacy began forming in that dust-filled room. Later, in her small office, the estate buzzed faintly around her. Footsteps, distant voices, clinking silver. Lila tried to focus on schedules and supply requests, but her thoughts kept circling back to that room and Julian's tentative hope. Just before lunch, Nina came in with coffee and 2 warm croissants. "You don't have to bring that," Lila protested. "I know," Nina grinned, "but I like that you eat now." Lila laughed. "Your trouble." "Good trouble," Nina replied, hopping onto the desk edge. "A few months ago," Nina said, "none of us thought you'd last here. Not because you weren't good, but because this house didn't let people like us stay." Lila looked at her. "And now?" Nina shrugged. "Now it feels like maybe we're allowed to stay, maybe even belong." Those words lingered long after Nina left. That evening, Julian walked the garden paths alone, hands in his coat pockets. The stars were faint but steady overhead. He stopped beneath the oak, his thinking place now, too. He heard the door creak open behind him, then softer steps. Lila joined him, folder in hand. "Finished the wellness room outline," she said, passing it over. He flipped through. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, books, financial literacy pamphlets, therapy resources. He closed the folder. "This is more than I imagined," he said. "It's what I would have needed," Lila replied quietly. "A year ago, 5 years ago." He nodded. "When I hired you, I didn't even remember your name. I'm not proud of that." She smirked slightly. "You remember it now." "I do," he said, "and I don't want to look away again." Her smile faded into something steadier. "Then don't." He stepped a little closer, careful not to crowd her. "I won't," he promised. Days later, in the gallery hallway, rows of Hart portraits watched silently as Julian and Lila walked side by side. "All Harts?" she asked. Every last one, he said. Except my mother. Her photo's in storage. Agnes said it looked too modern. Lila stopped by a blank section of wall bearing a brass plaque marked reserved. What's this for? Used to be for the next Hart heir, he said. Never got around to it. She traced the edge. Maybe it doesn't have to be blood, she murmured. The new portrait wall came together piece by piece. Julian cleared the section of gallery, ordered simple frames, and told Lila she'd pick the first 5 honorees herself. No arguments, no substitutions, just the names that felt right. She chose Samuel, Nina, Rosa, Marta the cook, and Mr. Everett Cole, the retired driver who still visited on Sundays. Each portrait would be black and white, no airbrushing, just their faces and a single quote underneath. Nina's line read, "I stayed to get louder, not quieter." Samuel's, "Every seed I planted here grew more than I imagined." Lila's own space remained empty for now. She wasn't ready to see her face on that wall yet. That night, Julian found Lila alone in the old archive room, sitting cross-legged beside open boxes of photographs Agnes had kept locked away. "I found your mom's picture," she said softly, lifting a thin silver frame toward him. It showed his mother in the former reading room, sunshine sliding across her cheek, a book open in her lap. Julian's hand shook when he took it. "I haven't seen this since the funeral," he whispered. "She belongs back upstairs." "So do you," Lila said quietly. She shook her head when he started to protest, and he let it go. Instead, he opened a dusty carton marked MH letters and pulled out a bundle of yellowed envelopes tied with faded blue ribbon. Lila slipped one free, unfolding it carefully. A note to a young patient, written in looping ink, simple and tender. At the bottom, a final line. "Even when you're scared, keep your eyes open. That's how you see who walks beside you." Lila refolded the page and placed it in his hand. "She already understood," she murmured. Julian stared at the script, throat tight. "She knew everything I'm only figuring out now," he admitted. Around them, forgotten years pressed close, quietly listening. They stayed there on the floor, shoulders nearly touching, surrounded by boxes of memories that Agnes had tried to bury. The future of the estate was quietly being replanted in the same room where its past had been sealed away. Just after 7 the next morning, Lila opened the front door of Hart Estate. The sky was still washed out gray, grass beating with dew, the world suspended between darkness and daylight as if holding its breath for a verdict. She bent automatically to grab the morning paper, an old habit from her maid days. Julian preferred digital news now, but the weight of print had always settled her nerves. Today, though, the headline punched the air from her lungs. Scandal in service. Hart Estate's maid to exec rise. Sparks questions. Her name appeared in bold twice before the first column break. She didn't need to finish the story. She already felt the undertones. Coded suspicion dressed up as concerned inquiry. The accompanying photo showed her leaving the estate gates weeks ago, tired eyes, plain clothes, no smile. Of course, they'd chosen that one. Carefully, Lila folded the paper in half and set it face down on the entry table. Then she walked straight to the study. Julian sat at his desk, coffee in hand, scrolling through emails with a clenched jaw. He looked up the second she entered. "You saw it?" he asked. "I did," she answered, voice flat. He rose at once. "I'm sorry, Lila. I should have seen this coming." She crossed her arms, not defensive, just bracing herself. "Who handed it to them?" "Most likely someone at the Ames Foundation," he said. "It's coordinated. Whispers upgraded to headlines." "And the board?" she asked. Spooked, he replied. I called an emergency session. They haven't yanked support yet, but they're rattled. She studied his face. You don't look rattled. I'm not, Julian said quietly. I'm furious. I don't need you fighting my personal war, she said. I'm not, he replied. This is ours now. He picked up a slim folder and handed it to her. Our response. A public letter we signed together, or not at all. Lila opened it and read aloud. Transparency isn't scandal. Change isn't corruption. Shared power doesn't diminish power. It multiplies it. She lifted her eyes, genuinely startled. You wrote this? Samuel helped, Julian admitted. He said you wouldn't sign unless you recognized yourself inside it. A reluctant smile pulled at her mouth. He knows me too well. Julian moved toward the fireplace, one hand braced on the mantel. They're not going to stop, Lila. You understand that? She nodded. Then let them spend their energy, she answered. Later that morning, Lila sat in her office while her phone buzzed with notifications. Articles, mentions, messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Nina walked in with coffee and a pastry carefully wrapped in a cloth napkin, setting them down without ceremony. You hanging in there? Nina asked. Barely, Lila admitted. Want me to march downtown and shout at someone in expensive shoes? I'll do it. I'll wear my good church heels. Lila laughed. No crimes today, please, but thank you. Nina perched on the edge of the desk. You knew something like this might happen, didn't you? I did, Lila said softly. I just didn't realize it would feel so much like being stripped naked in public again. You're not just some name they can chew and spit out, Nina said. You're proof the old rules crack. That's why they're scared. Lila glanced at the folded newspaper nearby. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just kept my head down. Too late, Nina replied gently. You already taught us to stand taller. You set off a bell nobody can unring. By afternoon, emails began pouring in, from former staff, neighbors, even two of Micah's teachers, short notes of solidarity and quiet gratitude. Some were just a single line. I see you. I believe you. I'm glad you stayed. Lila read every one, tears she hadn't planned on shedding smudging the ink as support wrapped softly around the day's uglier noise. That evening, Julian held a small press conference in the estate garden. Only a few reporters braved the drizzle, but the live stream's view counter jumped past 20,000 within an hour. This time, Lila stood beside him, not behind. This property has survived wars, recessions, and more ego than I'd like to admit, Julian began. But nothing has threatened it more than silence. Silence about who actually holds it together. He gestured toward Lila. That ends today. This is Lila Brooks, he continued. She helped rebuild this house, not with bricks or paint, but with accountability, structure, and a spine made of pure steel. Every role she holds here was earned the hard way. Lila stepped forward, ignoring the podium. She looked straight into the nearest camera. You don't have to believe in me, she said, but believe in the people who wash your dishes, watch your kids, and make your meals. Because when you dismiss them, she added quietly, you're dismissing the foundation holding your life up. Applause started, hesitant, then swelled. Inside later, Samuel placed the morning's paper next to the stack of staff portraits awaiting frames. Without comment, he tore the front page in two, flipped it upside down, and slid the scraps under Lila's printed quote about air and permission. Let them print whatever they like, he said. These walls remember better than they do. Overnight, the weather shifted. Gray thickened into a soft, persistent rain, and the estate seemed to fold into itself. Lila woke before dawn to the steady tap of water against glass and a heaviness she couldn't blame entirely on the storm. By 8, Julian had called her to the study. He sat behind his desk, uncharacteristically still, a sealed manila envelope in front of him. His hair was damp, suit jacket tossed over a chair, exhaustion carved beneath his eyes. "You okay?" Lila asked softly. He nodded once. "I need you to see something." She sat opposite him. He nudged the envelope across the polished wood. "Found this in a cabinet in Agnes's old suite," he said. "It's my mother's original will. The one the board used after her death wasn't the real first version," he added. Lila's fingers tightened around the envelope. "What does it change?" Julian exhaled slowly. "It names me, sure, but it also establishes a trust for staff." Lila froze. "A trust?" "A long-term wellness and education fund for anyone who served here more than 5 years, he explained. She listed Samuel, Rosa, Marta, Mr. Everett, people who've given their whole lives to this place. "Why did nobody know?" Lila asked. "Because Agnes buried it," Julian said bitterly. "She filed a clean version, stripped the staff clause, consolidated assets, probably told herself she was protecting the estate's bottom line." Lila's hands curled into fists in her lap. "She stole their safety net." "She did," Julian agreed, "and I'm going to fix it." He pulled out a legal pad filled with messy handwriting. "I've already talked to my attorney about reinstating everything, retroactively." Lila's chest ached. "They don't realize what this could mean for their families," she whispered. "They will," Julian said. His gaze met hers, fierce and vulnerable at once. "I need you beside me when we tell them. This isn't PR, it's course correction." "It's justice," Lila replied. By late afternoon, she'd gathered the senior staff in the east parlor. Samuel, Nina, Rosa, Marta, several older workers. Rain rattled softly against tall windows. Julian entered quietly and stood at her shoulder. Lila cleared her throat. "We found something of Mrs. Hart's," she began. "Something that was supposed to be yours years ago." Julian lifted the original will. "This document," he said, "was written to honor everyone who built this home with their labor. My mother believed the estate's success should be shared," he continued. "She outlined funds so your kids could study, so your medical bills wouldn't bury you, so retirement wouldn't feel like exile." The room fell completely still. Samuel rubbed his face with one weathered hand. Nina whispered, "She saw us." Rosa's voice shook. "Even when no one else did." Lila smiled faintly. "She did. And now the rest of the world will, too." Julian went on, voice firm. "Everyone who's worked here more than 5 years will receive a letter detailing the trust. Education grants, health coverage, housing support if needed. This isn't charity. This is something you were promised and denied." Silence stretched, thick and holy. Finally, Samuel said, voice cracking, "If I'd known this existed back then." Julian asked quietly, "You would have stayed longer?" Samuel shook his head. "No. I would have believed this place could be better." After they dispersed, Lila lingered in the empty parlor, palm resting on the mantel. Justice rarely arrived neatly labeled and right on time. When it did at all, it usually felt like a miracle that came with paperwork attached. Julian joined her, eyes reflecting the fire. "She wrote it because she knew I might forget," he said. "Knew I'd need instructions when the noise got louder than my conscience." "You didn't forget," Lila replied. "You almost did," he admitted. "You're the reason I started listening again." They watched the flames for a while. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" he said. "We rebuild the board, shift the power, Make sure this house protects the people who protect it. And your name? Your legacy? She asked. Julian shrugged slightly. My legacy isn't whatever ends up on a stone plaque, he said. It's what they carry forward when I'm no longer here. That's the part that matters. Later, Nina found Lila over the stove, stirring a pot of soup in the staff kitchen. You good? Nina asked. Lila looked up, dazed but softer. I think I'm finally catching up to my own life, she said. Nina smirked. You ever gonna let them hang your picture on that wall? Lila's mouth twisted. Maybe once I've earned it. You already earned it twice, Nina shot back. She stirred the soup and added, My mama used to say justice sometimes looks like soup. Everybody sitting at the same table for once. Lila smiled. Then we'd better feed them well. Downtown, the 34th floor conference room of Hart Global gleamed with glass and polished wood. The city skyline spread beyond like another kind of kingdom. Today, though, the sharp edges of the room belonged to Lila as much as Julian. Her nameplate sat beside his. Lila Brooks, co-chair. Board veterans, graying men and women who'd known his parents, filtered in, some nodding stiffly, others pointedly ignoring her. Julian stood, buttoning his jacket. Thanks for coming on short notice, he began. 2 items today, one financial, one moral. He let the last word hang. Board Chair Dorothy Hale adjusted her glasses. We've reviewed the article, she said. Damage control is underway. I'm not interested in damage control, Julian replied. I'm interested in correcting the record. A ripple of disapproval traveled around the table. For years, this board treated the company and the estate like separate planets. They're not. They share one reputation. He laid his mother's original will on the table. This document was intentionally suppressed. Its most important clause erased before you ratified the revision. Dorothy frowned. That's a serious implication, Julian. Lila's voice cut in, measured and clear. It's not an implication, she said. It's reality. Heads turned. This will create a staff trust, a redistribution based on service, not blood. Agnes removed it. You, knowingly or not, endorsed that deletion and everything it stole. The room turned heavy. One member, Mr. Calloway, cleared his throat. Let's say, hypothetically, this is accurate. What's your solution? Julian spoke. We reinstate the trust retroactively and issue a public acknowledgement. No spin, Dorothy scoffed. Do you understand the fallout with our legacy donors? Lila met her gaze coolly. If your donors balk because workers were finally treated as human beings, maybe their names don't belong on your buildings at all. Dorothy stiffened, but Julian cut in. She's right. We don't need investors allergic to decency. And let me be extremely clear. If this board votes down the trust, I'll dissolve Hart Global as it stands and walk away from the name. Gasps erupted. Pins dropped. We'll rebuild under a new structure, he finished, and the world will know exactly why. As shock rippled, Lila watched decades of assumed power begin to wobble, not from shouting, but from consequences. Let's vote, Julian said. When the count finished, 7 in favor, 4 opposed, 2 abstaining, the motion passed. Lila's hands were steady as she gathered her notes. Julian closed his folder, an exhausted kind of relief in his eyes. As members filed out, one woman in her late 60s paused beside Lila. I didn't vote for you at first, she said softly. Evelyn Price. I was wrong. Lila nodded. Then I hope the woman you once worked for is proud you stayed this time. Evelyn blinked, smiled faintly, and left. In the elevator, Lila finally exhaled. Julian leaned against the mirrored wall, studying her reflection. "What?" she asked. "You were terrifying," he said. She laughed. "You threatened to burn down your own company." "I was angry," he replied. "You were unstoppable." She shrugged. "We're not finished." "Not even close," he agreed. Back at the estate, Nina had baked a pan of peach cobbler, her go-to therapy. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and sugar and relief. "How'd it go?" Nina asked, sliding a steaming slice toward Lila. "We won," Lila said. Nina stared. "Like, really won?" Trust reinstated. Julian put his inheritance on the table. Nina whistled low. "Guess we're not in the servants' wing anymore." Lila chuckled, then sobered. "I'm not sure how to exist in this version of reality," she admitted. Nina shrugged. "You'll figure it out. Just don't forget how to exist in the old one. That's where your compass came from." That night, Lila padded barefoot through the house, trailing her fingertips over banisters and door frames that once felt like barriers. She stopped before her own portrait, now hanging beside Samuel's, Nina's, and Rosa's. The quote beneath her face read, "Power isn't what you inherit. It's what you survive and choose to change." She whispered to the hallway, "We're still here." For the first time, the silence felt like agreement instead of dismissal. A summer storm crashed in 2 days later. Rain pounded the front steps, thunder close enough to rattle the chandeliers. The security gate shorted again, and muddy footprints smeared the marble foyer. Nina chased them with a mop, muttering. Layla barely noticed the mess. Her mind was stuck on a voicemail from earlier, a calm voice identifying herself as Detective Marisol Vega. "We've uncovered something unusual regarding the estate's old financial filings. I'd like to show you in person." By noon, Lila and Julian sat in Vega's cramped office, rain streaking the window. The detective, mid-40s with sharp eyes and tired shoulders, slid a photocopied ledger across the desk. "This came from a retired estate accountant's safe deposit box," she began. "What you're holding is an off-the-books ledger," Vega said. "It details quiet payouts, legal donations, and internal settlements. We already suspected Agnes controlled staff finances. This confirms it, and reveals something uglier." Lila skimmed names, Rosa, Marta, Samuel, amounts that matched past emergencies. Then her gaze snagged on one line. March 12, 2017, $40,000. Staff settlement, L. Brooks. Note, silence clause executed. Her breath whooshed out. "That never happened," she whispered. Julian read over her shoulder. "She never signed anything. She never received this." Vega nodded. "Exactly. This transaction exists only on paper. Our working theory, it was meant as a weapon, a justification if anyone tried to promote you or defend you. On file, you'd already been paid off to keep quiet," Vega said. Julian's jaw locked. "And anyone who challenged Agnes would find this neat little lie waiting." Lila swallowed hard. "She prepared my erasure years before I rose. She built a false history," Vega agreed. "We think she did it for others, too." Back at the estate, thunder cracked overhead as they stepped through the doors. Lila moved through the halls as though walking backward through time. Every memory involving Agnes replayed with a darker tint. Every casual dismissal, every blocked opportunity, every cold smile, revealed now as part of a calculated sabotage, not mere meanness. "We'll go public," Julian said. Lila stopped halfway up the stairs. "No," she said. He frowned. "If we blast this now, it becomes a revenge story. I don't want vengeance." She turned, eyes burnished with resolve. "I want reclamation, the truth on our terms." "So, what's your move?" he asked. "We let the house tell it," she replied, heading toward the library. Julian hurried after her. "Tell me we're not digging up Agnes's ghost for fun," he said. "We're looking for what she was terrified of," Lila answered. Her own words. She pulled a small brass key from her pocket and opened a concealed cabinet she'd discovered months earlier behind the shelves. Inside, stacked meticulously, were over 40 leather journals, spines worn, pages stuffed with notes. Agnes's private record of decades. "If there's any truth left, it's here," Lila said. They sat on the library floor as lightning flared outside, reading entry after entry. The pages dripped with control, cruelty, and underneath it all, an almost desperate fear of losing authority. One passage snagged Lila's attention. Lila Brooks sees everything. She reminds me of Margaret before she left. There's steel in her silence. She can't be controlled, only slowed. Julian closed the journal carefully. "She was scared of you." Lila stared into the flames. "She wasn't scared of me," she murmured. "She was terrified of being forgotten, of being replaced by a version of herself who didn't obey the old rules." That realization landed heavier than anger. That night, Lila gathered the staff beneath the oak tree. The rain had faded, leaving the ground soft and the air clean. She held one of Agnes's journals in one hand and a copy of the forged ledger entry in the other. "Today, I found something that tried to rewrite who I am," she said, voice steady. "A lie written years ago, waiting to be used." Faces watched her. Samuel, Nina, Rosa, Marta, newer workers who'd only known the post-Agnes ERA. "I won't let anyone pre-write my story," Lila continued. She held up the ledger copy. "This ends here." She placed it in a metal fire bowl, struck a match, and dropped it. Paper curled, blackened, then surrendered to flame. No cameras, no spectacle, just a clean burn in the dark. Julian stepped beside her. "What about the rest?" he asked softly. Lila gazed up through the branches. "We keep the journals," she said. "We share their truth slowly, on our terms." "We won't hide it," she added, "but we won't let it own us either." As the last page crumbled to ash, a small wind gusted, carrying fragments into the night. Lila stood tall, less a survivor now and more the storm's architect. Days later, the nursery hallway lay quiet. Early light diffused through linen curtains. Lila padded along in bare feet, coffee mug warming her hands. After everything, ledger, journals, hearings, the silence tasted different. Not empty, waiting. A tiny sound broke it. A rustle near the old service door. Lila paused, turning. A small shadow tried to disappear behind a chair, barely 3 feet tall. "Hey there," she said gently. "You don't have to hide." A little boy crept out, mop of curls, dinosaur t-shirt hanging off his narrow shoulders. He clutched a crumpled drawing. Lila's heart squeezed. "You lost?" she asked. He sniffled and thrust the paper toward her. 2 stick figures under a huge sun. One figure had a green dress, the other spiky orange hair. She recognized it from a folder in Julian's office. "You must be Daniel," she said. He nodded. "Where's your grown-up?" He pointed down the hall. "He's snoring too loud," he whispered. Lila bit back a smile. "That can be scary," he edged closer. "You're the nice lady," he added. "Have we met?" she asked. "No," Daniel said, earnest, "but they said you fixed the house." 30 minutes later, Julian found them in the sunroom. Daniel slept curled in Lila's lap, drawing still in hand. She was mid-story about a giraffe trying to fly with paper wings. Julian stopped in the doorway, something tender crossing his face. You found him, he said quietly. He found me, Lila replied. Said thunder and snoring both needed to be escaped. Julian chuckled. I should have warned you. He's an expert nap evader. She showed him the drawing. He also loves sunshine, apparently. Julian's expression softened further. He's been through hell, Julian said. His mom died last year. His dad wasn't safe. Lila looked down at the sleeping boy. And now? Now he's here, Julian replied. For a while, the foundation wants to expand, build a proper transition wing. Daniel may be the first of many, he added. Lila brushed a curl from Daniel's forehead. He thinks I fixed the house, she murmured. You did, Julian said. She shook her head. Maybe I nudged it. He might be the one who heals it. That evening, educators and community liaisons from the foundation gathered in the parlor. Lila sat at the head of the table with Julian, notes spread neatly. We've cleared the east wing, she began. Guest rooms are being converted to long-term suites. The idea isn't just shelter, she continued. It's stability. A place kids can catch their breath while everything else is chaos. A woman from Child Services frowned slightly. You're housing foster kids at Hart Estate? Lila nodded. Yes. Children with nowhere else safe, she clarified. Another man murmured, It's highly unconventional. Lila smiled faintly. So am I. Julian spoke. The estate has room, structure, resources. What it lacked was the courage to reimagine its purpose. That's no longer a problem. Murmurs followed. Concerns, curiosity, but no outright rejection. The world was watching too closely now for anyone to comfortably defend old hierarchies. By nightfall, plans were sketched, timelines agreed upon. The East Wing would learn a new kind of noise. Lila walked through the cleared hallway later, pausing at each freshly painted door. Beds made, shelves waiting for books, soft lamps ready to be switched on. Daniel was just the beginning. She opened a window, letting cool air flood the space. Behind her, Julian leaned in the doorway. You all right? He asked. She nodded. I used to daydream about running away from this house, she said. Now I stay awake at night thinking about what it can become. Remember what you told me? He asked. Justice is reclamation, not revenge. She nodded. This, he said, motioning down the hall, is that. She looked out over the grounds, voice steady. We're only just starting. That weekend, the staff gathered for the estate's first family dinner. No uniforms, no hierarchies, just mismatched chairs, too much food, and easy music. Daniel sat between Rosa and Samuel, animatedly describing flying giraffes again. When dessert appeared, Nina clinked her glass. I've got a toast, she announced. To Lila Brooks, our storm, our backbone, our sister. You shook this house down to studs and are building something bigger than any of us imagined. Lila rose, eyes bright. She lifted her glass. To the ones who stayed, she said. The room answered as one. To the ones who stayed. Dawn, a few days later, found her walking barefoot through the dew-damp garden, robe drawn tight. Fog hugged the hedges. The air smelled like damp earth and second chances. Her thoughts circled back to Agnes's journals, one entry in particular. I fear what Lila could become because she reminds me of who I killed to fit in. That line had haunted her all night, not as praise, but as confession. At the marble bench beneath the old fig tree, Agnes's favorite spot, Lila sat and laid her palm on the cold stone. I'm not here to curse you, she whispered, but I won't guard your silence anymore. Footsteps creaked behind her. Julian appeared with a steaming mug. Nina says you'd be out here wrestling ghosts, he said. Lila accepted the cup, smiling. She knows me too well. You found something in those journals, Julian said. She believed in change once, Lila answered. Then buried it under fear. She was terrified of losing grip on a system that was already strangling her. Julian nodded slowly. That sounds like Agnes. She feared me, Lila said, eyes on the trees, because I reminded her of the parts she lost. Julian was quiet a moment. Is that where I'm headed? He asked finally. That kind of fear. She turned to him. Only if you stop listening. I don't want to become what this house trained people to be, he admitted. Then don't, she said. You opened the doors. Keep walking through them. He looked at her steadily. I didn't just open them, Lila. I followed you through. Later that morning, the first group of children arrived in quiet cars with social workers. 3 boys, 2 girls, ages 6 to 12, each clutching a bag in that same wary, temporary look Lila knew from foster corridors and shelters. The staff lined the hallway, Nina with cookies, Marta with juice cartons, Rosa with soft blankets over her arm. Lila greeted each child by name, always lowering herself to their eye level, never towering over them like a judge. Julian stood further back, protective but unobtrusive. When 9-year-old Lena hesitated at the threshold, Lila held out her hand. You don't have to come in yet, she said. But there's a room with your name on it and a bookshelf taller than me. Lena peered past her, then slowly placed her small hand in Lila's. Inside, the kids found rooms, not rows of cots, routines, not punishments, respect granted without conditions. By evening, laughter cracked open corners of the East Wing untouched for decades. That night, donors gathered in the ballroom, a softer crowd than before, but still wary. Lila had insisted on hosting here instead of some faceless downtown venue. Let them see what their money actually touches, she'd told Julian. Guests arrived in tailored clothes, greeted at the door not by a butler, but by Nina, whose gaze silently informed them this was sacred ground. Lila wore a simple navy dress. No glamour, just quiet authority that fit like skin. During dinner, Julian rose with his glass. This property has long been obsessed with legacy, he said. For years, we defined that by money and surname, but that definition nearly destroyed us. His eyes found Lila across the room. Now, we define legacy differently, he continued. It's not what you stack in your own vault, but what you build for others when nobody's taking pictures. Someone murmured, to Lila, and a ripple followed, glasses lifting. She reluctantly stood. To the ones who scrubbed these floors with no applause, she said. To those who stayed when it hurt. To the kids learning it's safe to unpack a bag again. That's the legacy that matters. The applause that followed felt unguarded, real. Later, on the upstairs balcony, Lila leaned on the rail, bare feet against a cool stone. Below, the estate glowed warm, windows like lanterns, music a faint pulse. Julian joined her quietly. You okay? He asked. I think I'm finally full, she said, like the spinning stopped for a minute. He smiled. Remember when you first arrived? He asked. Which time? She teased. When I thought you stole the porcelain, or when you were scrubbing baseboards? Both, he said. She nodded. I remember feeling completely invisible here. And now? He asked. She looked at the stars. Now I'm the part they'll never erase, she replied. Night deepened, velvet and star-pricked. From her bedroom, Lila could see the West Wing lit softly instead of shuttered, children's shadows moving behind curtains. Her phone rang, unknown number. She considered letting it die, then answered. this is Lila. A calm voice responded, Miss Brooks, I'm Agent Lauren Keating with the Department of Justice. We need to speak privately regarding Foundation finances. They met the next morning in a windowless conference room at a federal building outside the city. Keating slid a thick folder across. What's inside is sensitive, she said. We believe you're instrumental to a case involving fraudulent charitable practices. The board just approved the staff trust, Lila said, unsettled. We're fixing things. That's the visible part, Keating replied. Underneath, we've traced missing grant funds, money intended for marginalized communities diverted into shell organizations and offshore accounts. Lila opened the file and scanned lists of fake charities and transfers. 2 names stood out in black ink, Agnes Whitfield and Dorothy Hale. Both signatures authorized distributions to projects that never existed in Appalachia and rural Louisiana. I had no idea, Lila whispered. Keating nodded. We don't think Julian did either. Agnes left tripwires everywhere, but some of her allies are still active. Your promotion rattled them. One of them came to us. Brought evidence. Why me? Lila asked. Why am I the witness? Because you're the only one who challenged the internal structure, Keating answered. And because your rise forced people to panic. They moved sloppily. You're the catalyst. Keating pulled a grainy photograph from the file, a security still from the estate. Lila recognized the hallway instantly. The timestamp was 3 nights ago. The image showed a figure slipping into the West Wing office after hours, Rosa Elena Carter. No, Lila breathed. Rosa? We believe she accessed stored records from Agnes's time, Keating said. Maybe out of fear, maybe curiosity, maybe under pressure. Either way, she's now central to our timeline. Ice slid down Lila's spine. Back at the estate, Lila walked the corridor to the laundry room. Rosa folded linens with her usual quiet precision. We need to talk, Lila said. Rosa's hands paused. She finished one last fold before setting the towel aside and sitting slowly. I figured this would come, Rosa murmured. Didn't expect you carrying the flame. I'm not here to burn you, Lila said. I need the truth. Rosa smoothed her apron. I started here at 23, back when Agnes ruled like a warden. Survival meant signing whatever crossed my path, Rosa continued, looking away, saying, yes, ma'am, when everything inside screamed. Lila listened, jaw tight. When you showed up, I saw change coming, and what it might cost. You went into the West Wing office, Lila said. Rosa nodded. Not to steal, to bury what I should have burned. She opened a drawer, pulling out a sealed envelope. Letters between Agnes and Dorothy, proof they siphoned grants into their own pockets. Why wait? Lila asked. Rosa's eyes glistened. Because I thought protecting the house meant hiding its shame. You showed me it means dragging it into daylight. Lila took the envelope. Then we'll finish what fear started and write the ending ourselves. Quiet people often carry the heaviest truths. If you've lived long enough to raise children, bury friends, and sit through more church potlucks than you can count, you know something Lila's story makes painfully clear. The loudest voice isn't always the honest one. Many of you have worked under a supervisor like Agnes, polished, efficient, and cruel when the boss wasn't looking. Lila reminded me of countless women from the 1950s and 1960s who scrubbed floors, took the bus across town, and still came home to make dinner, all while swallowing disrespect to keep a roof over their families' heads. When Julian first believed a lie about the shattered vase, he did what many in power do. He trusted convenience over character. But truth has a stubborn way of surviving. A hidden camera, an old gardener's courage, and a billionaire's guilty conscience finally met in the same moment. For those of us in our later years, the lesson is simple but sharp. Never underestimate the quiet worker in the corner. Very often, they are the only ones still holding the truth with both hands. Power means responsibility, not just comfort. Older Americans remember when a good job meant staying somewhere for 20 or 30 years, sometimes with a pension at the end. You knew the boss's name, and the boss knew yours, or should have. Julian had the money, the estate, the name on the gate, but he didn't really see the people keeping his world running. Many of you have lived that from the other side, standing in factory lines, hospital corridors, or classrooms where leadership talked about family while ignoring real suffering. When Julian watched that video and confronted Agnes, something shifted. He fired the abuser, promoted the maid, and honored his mother's forgotten will by restoring the staff trust. It wasn't charity, it was finally doing right by the people who had earned their place. For those in their 60s and 70s, this story is a reminder to hold leaders accountable, including ourselves, when we are the ones with the keys, because comfort without responsibility easily becomes cruelty. Legacy is built in everyday acts of courage. By the time you reach 65, you start thinking less about climbing ladders and more about what you're leaving behind. Lila's journey from soaked, shivering maid under the oak tree to co-chair of the foundation and protector of foster children is not a fairy tale. It's a testimony to steady courage. She didn't chase revenge. She chose reclamation of her name, her work, and her community. She helped turn guest rooms into safe rooms, staff dinners into true family tables, and an old estate into a place where children and workers could finally breathe. Many of you have your own Hart Estate, a family, a church, a small business, a veterans group, somewhere younger people are watching what you do next. The lesson is this: our real legacy isn't in the size of the house or the number of zeros in the bank account. It's in whether the people who come after us feel safer, stronger, and more seen because we were here at all. Friends, after walking through Lila's long journey from the rain-soaked oak tree to rebuilding the Hart Estate, I'd love to hear from you. If you're over 60, have you ever felt invisible like Lila? Or had a moment when someone finally saw your worth and stood up for you? What would justice and dignity look like in your family, workplace, or church today? Please share your stories in the comments, hit the like button, and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss more videos that honor your experience and pass hard-earned wisdom to the next generation.